With the rise of armchair urbanist on YouTube, there's been an increasing call against car-centric culture. And I get that. I have my own personal gripes against car culture, though I'm not 100% against the car. Speeding on the interstate is fucking exhilarating. But I do have my problems. But one thing I don't get about all these armchair urbanists is their fight against urban gentrification, which has developed in the US as a response against car culture. You'd think the same people calling for the Boston Big Dig and the destruction of the Alaskan Viaduct would also support the revitalization of American downtowns. But you'd be surprised. Urbanists say that gentrification is ruining the identity of American cities and outpricing locals of the surrounding areas and regions due to the increase in land values. Let's dive into history and pick apart some of these arguments, shall we? This first argument I was actually introduced by Wendover Productions. I know for a fact that he wasn't the first person to talk about this, but his video is really well made and it was the first video I saw about it. In the video, he was talking about how gentrification of the suburbs and inner cities of the US have been making every American town seem the same. I know I'm going to piss off a lot of people, but even before the gentrification movement of the 21st century, most American cities were already the exact same in most regards, with a variable in quality. Most large towns in the United States were just trying to replicate the largest city in the region, which in turn was trying to replicate one of these 5 cities. And this development also predates gentrification by 170 years. In the age of Reconstruction, southern cities were trying to rebuild from the carnage of the Civil War, while northern cities were still experiencing massive inflows of immigration and industrialization. Ravaged population centers across Dixie, such as Montgomery, Richmond, Birmingham, Jackson, and Savannah, were trying to build themselves up to resemble the most prestigious city in the South, Atlanta, Georgia. Funnily enough, Atlanta was trying to replicate the urban feel and aura of New York City. It even called itself the Empire City of the South, in reference to New York State. This was also happening in Yankeedom, where cities such as Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Buffalo were trying to make themselves more like New York City, and in New England, several smaller cities were trying to make themselves protégés of Boston. In the Midwest of the United States, cities were trying to copy post-Fire Chicago. You can even see this today in Indianapolis, in which they're trying to replicate the Loop. And in the Wild West, the city to copy was Los Angeles. This is why many southwestern cities such as Phoenix, Albuquerque, Dallas-Fort Worth, El Paso, Santa Fe, and Las Vegas are low density, large, and sprawling. So while yes, there are certain neighborhoods such as your Georgetowns and Chinatowns that do hold a unique culture or important historical presence, or both, this is not the case with the majority of urban habitats, especially in the US, where, for most cities, the most important event in its history was the founding of the region and incorporation into the nation. So the argument of 21st century gentrification destroying the identity of American cities really does fall flat, especially considering that for most American cities, their identity is just copying a larger metropolitan region's success. While on the surface, the argument for gentrification only being accessible for the upper class may be true, when you look into the fine print, the waters of truth kind of get muddy. It is factual that gentrification is causing increases in land value and expenses for many cities. But something that is ignored is that land is already increasing in value, whether it's developed or not. Here in the United States, the only thing that's keeping parcels of land prices down is actually the development on the land, especially if that development is heavily blighted. And even then, gentrification can actually stabilize house prices if used to its full potential, which in the current state it is not. The thing holding back gentrification from being able to create affordable house prices are actually out-of-date and overly bureaucratic interferences in zoning ordinances. Developers, just like you and me when doing anything, don't want to be constantly walking on eggshells that would be mired in bureaucracy and make a profitable venture into a deficit. So, for construction companies, it's just easier to build new subdivision, commercial centers, office spaces, and luxury stadiums that would bring tons of new tax revenue and revitalize the urban heart outside of the city limits. American cities have put themselves in a position where they are losing businesses and taxpayers to the suburbs by hiking up taxes and entangling affordable housing projects in development hell as a response to losing businesses and taxpayers to the suburbs. There is a reason why, even though the cons outweigh the pros, we are continuing to build suburbs that are so disconnected from the urban core, they might as well be their own separate community. For companies and consumers alike, it's just easier to build on untapped farmland beyond the city than building the abandoned lots within city limits. This nightmare of legal logistics has led to more suburban sprawl, and is one of the main contributing factors to the housing crisis that has hit America in the 2020s. So, it really isn't gentrification that is ruining America's urban core, nor is it gentrification that is outpricing locals from their own homes. It is government bureaucracy strangling free markets to allow supply to meet demand. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. So, how do we really fix these problems if blaming gentrification is out of the picture? Reform and deregulation. Reforming American zoning codes, which for many cities, municipalities, and towns across the nation haven't been updated since the 1970s. Retrofit laws on building standards to account for more modern building techniques and materials. And also reduce. Get rid of the outdated tax codes for land, zoning maps, and just straight up tear out some pages from the book. Something tells me that the city of Clear Lake, Iowa doesn't need a 168-chapter zoning ordinance on what can and can't be built on a construction site. Trust me, a little change in the book can go a long way in fixing our nation's urban problems. And if you don't believe my word, just look at the rebirth of the Japanese housing market. This has been Mr. Asian Pie. See you on the flip, and don't be stupid.